Before I even reached the table, they started laughing. It wasn't that polite, awkward laughter people use to cover up discomfort. It was a sharp, confident, dismissive laugh, the kind that announces the ending is already written. My half-sister, Serafina, didn't even bother hiding it. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her legs, and whispered something to my stepmother, Evelyn, making them both chuckle. The lawyer sitting across from them adjusted his cufflinks and slowly shook his head, looking at me like a lost child wandering into oncoming traffic. I stood alone next to the plaintiff's table, with nothing but a legal pad and a pen. No lawyer, no entourage, no whispered huddles to talk strategy. Just me. The bailiff signaled for order, but the smirks on their faces didn't fade. They thought this was just a formality, a performance where I was supposed to play my designated part, the difficult daughter, an emotional footnote, a woman who would never belong in the Hale Dominion Empire. They expected me to break down, panic, and make a fool of myself in public. What they didn't know was that every laugh echoing in that courtroom was already outdated, because while they were busy rehearsing how to crush me, I had spent months listening, recording, reading, and learning exactly how power operates when it thinks no one is watching. So when I finally stood up to speak, the first words out of my mouth didn't sound desperate at all. They sounded like a confession they were completely unprepared to hear. A dead silence fell over the room, and it had nothing to do with the gavel. It was the quiet gasp of people suddenly realizing they might be on the wrong side of history. The air in courtroom 39 felt colder than it should have. It wasn't the temperature, it was the fact that everyone was avoiding my eyes. The clerks shuffled papers, the court reporter adjusted her headset, and even the judge took a little extra time reviewing the docket, as if delaying the inevitable awkwardness. Hale Dominion Estate versus Miranda Hale. Compared to the massive machine sitting across from me, my name on that piece of paper looked incredibly small. Evelyn Hale sat dressed in all black, proper and severe, looking like a woman who had already started mourning her loss of control. Her hair was perfectly styled, the silver strands arranged less to suggest age and more to project wisdom. She didn't look at me. She never looked at me unless she needed to remind me of my place. Serafina, my half-sister, looked completely bored. At 29, she looked like she walked off a magazine page, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the table. She grew up knowing she would inherit the world, while I grew up knowing I was, at best, tolerated. And then there was Gregory Vanton. If arrogance had a uniform, it would fit him perfectly. Flawless posture, a practiced smile, and decades of courtroom victories etched into the lines around his eyes. Gregory had represented senators, oil tycoons, pharma executives, the kind of people who never lose, the kind of people like my stepmother, the kind of people who expected me to disappear quietly. The judge finally looked up. Judge Lawrence Whitmore was old school, with zero patience for drama, but an even deeper hatred for hypocrisy. "Appearances," he said. Gregory stood up smoothly. "Gregory Vanton, Your Honor, representing the defendants, Mrs. Evelyn Hale and Miss Serafina Hale." The judge nodded and turned his gaze to my side. "And for the plaintiff?" I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor, the harsh noise echoing in the room longer than expected. I felt every eye lock onto me, a mix of curiosity and pity. "Miranda Hale," I said, representing myself. The silence that followed was heavy. Judge Whitmore's eyebrows shot up, Gregory's smile stiffened, and Serafina actually laughed out loud before quickly covering her mouth. Evelyn finally looked at me, her eyes showing no anger or fear, only disappointment. "Miss Hale," the judge said carefully, "this case involves a massive family estate, corporate control, and multiple trust documents. Are you certain you want to represent yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You understand you will be held to the exact same standards as a licensed attorney?" "Yes." "And that any procedural mistakes could permanently damage your case?" "Yes." He studied me for a long moment. "Very well." Gregory leaned in close to Evelyn, whispering with absolute confidence. I didn't need to hear his words to know what he was saying. "This won't take long." "Mr. Vanton," the judge said, "your opening statement." Gregory stepped forward like a man walking onto his own stage. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and reassuring, "the heart of this case, while unfortunate, is incredibly simple. Richard Hale was a visionary. He built Hale Dominion from a local manufacturing company into a global conglomerate employing tens of thousands of people. Along the way, he established a clear and comprehensive estate plan. He motioned gently toward Evelyn and Serafina. That plan entrusted continuity and stability to his wife and youngest daughter. Unfortunately, the plaintiff, Miss Miranda Hale, is now attempting to disrupt that plan, based purely on personal grievances rather than legal facts. He turned slightly toward me, without looking me fully in the face. She claims she was pushed out, betrayed, and sidelined. But the law doesn't govern feelings. The law governs documents. Gregory held up a binder thick enough to strain a wrist. Wills, trust amendments, corporate bylaws. Every document was legally signed, every procedure verified. He paused for emphasis. Miss Hale was properly provided for. She simply didn't get the portion she believes she deserves. Serafina didn't even bother hiding her smirk now. We will prove that this lawsuit is a charade, an attempt to rewrite history and punish those who are upholding Mr. Hale's final wishes. We ask the court to dismiss this complaint entirely. Gregory walked back to his seat, looking pleased. The judge turned to me. Miss Hale, please keep it brief. I walked forward slowly. Instead of going to the podium, I stood right where I was, placing my hands lightly on the table. My father passed away on a Tuesday, I said. Gregory frowned. The judge didn't interrupt. He had a lunch meeting scheduled that day, I continued, but he canceled it. He told his assistant he wasn't feeling well. By Friday, the board announced his sudden passing. By Monday, my access to the family office was revoked. For the first time, I looked straight at Evelyn. And by Wednesday, every document reflecting my father's original wishes had been replaced. Gregory scrambled to his feet. Objection! This is argumentative and speculative. Overruled, the judge said. She may continue. Evelyn's jaw tightened. I'm not standing here because I feel left out, I said. I'm standing here because my father's legacy was altered under circumstances that no longer look like a coincidence. Serafina scoffed. Embarrassing. I ignored her. My father didn't cut me out, I said calmly. He protected me, and the proof of that protection is exactly what terrified them so much that they felt forced to rewrite everything after he was gone. The courtroom was completely silent now. I will show how assets were moved into undisclosed offshore accounts, how trust amendments were signed while my father was medically unresponsive, and how they tried to damage my credibility by questioning my mental health. Gregory let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. Your Honor! And, I added, I will prove that my father saw all of this coming. The judge leaned forward slightly. Based on what? I took a deep breath. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, but my voice stayed steady. Based on the audio recordings he left behind. That was it. Gregory jumped up as if he'd been struck by lightning. Objection! This is absolutely ridiculous. Serafina's smile vanished. Evelyn gripped her purse tightly. The judge raised a hand. Miss Hale, what exactly are you claiming? I'm claiming, I said, that my father recorded his concerns about undue influence, the hiding of assets, and what he believed was a deliberate attempt to isolate him from me. I let the silence hang in the air. He also asked someone he trusted to keep those records safe until they were needed. Gregory's face went pale, and it had nothing to do with the courtroom lighting. This is a fishing expedition, he snapped. She has no counsel, no authentication, no— Sit down, Mr. Vanton, the judge said quietly. Gregory froze. I will decide what lacks foundation. He sat down. Judge Whitmore was looking at me with a completely different expression now. It wasn't sympathy, and it wasn't skepticism. It was genuine interest. Miss Hale, he said, this court will allow you to proceed. But be warned, allegations of this scale require evidence, not insinuations. I understand, I said. Deep down, everything fell into place. They had spent years telling me I was too emotional, too dramatic, too sensitive. They never noticed how closely I was watching while they assumed I wasn't worth putting on a show for. The judge set the schedule for the day, motions, exhibits, witnesses. During a brief recess, Serafina leaned toward me, her voice low and venomous. Do you really think you can handle this alone? She whispered. You don't belong here. I met her gaze. I know, I said. That's why you're afraid. Her smile never came back. Across the room, Gregory was talking frantically to Evelyn. His confidence had cracked just enough to show what lay beneath, doubt. As I organized my papers, I remembered the last voicemail my father left me. It was the one I had listened to 100 times before stepping into this courtroom, where he said, If they laugh at you, Miranda, let them laugh. People only laugh when they're convinced the truth can't touch them. He was wrong about a lot of things in his life, but he wasn't wrong about this. Not even close. 15 minutes later, the first recess ended, and the air in the courtroom seemed to breathe a sigh of relief without me. People stood up, chairs scraped the floor, and low, hurried conversations broke out across the aisles. Gregory Vanton was already moving, leaning over Evelyn and gesturing with one hand. Serafina followed closely, her eyes darting between the two of them, her earlier confidence replaced by something fragile. I remained in my seat. Bernard Clay slid quietly into the chair next to me, as if he had been there all along, as if the years following my father's passing hadn't deliberately pushed him into the shadows. He wore his usual gray suit, conservative to the point of being invisible, the kind of man powerful people only notice when it's already too late. "You're doing exactly what he wanted you to do," Bernard whispered, looking straight ahead. I didn't answer right away. My hands were steady on the table, but inside, everything was still buzzing. "They're shifting their strategy," I said. Gregory didn't expect the word recordings to come up so early. Bernard nodded. He built his career on controlling the narrative. You just told him there's a narrative he can't control. Across the courtroom, Evelyn glanced over. When she saw Bernard, her eyes narrowed. This was new. She had never noticed him before. Good. The bailiff called everyone back to their seats, and the chatter stopped instantly. Judge Whitmore sat back in his chair, his eyes sharp and completely focused. "Miss Hale," he said, "before we proceed, the court needs to clarify how you obtained these alleged recordings. This is not a criminal proceeding yet, but the implications are serious." "Yes, Your Honor." "Explain how these materials came into your possession." I stood up again. This time the sound of the chair scraping felt different, louder, heavier. "My father trusted very few people," I said, and as his health declined, that list got even shorter. Gregory rose halfway out of his seat. "Objection, irrelevant to this matter." "Sit down," the judge said flatly. Gregory sat. "Richard Hale kept detailed records," I continued, "not because he was paranoid, but because he understood leverage. He believed in documentation." I glanced at Bernard. Before he went into the hospital, he instructed his executive assistant to copy certain files and store them off-site. When that assistant was abruptly fired, those files were transferred to Mr. Clay. I nodded to Bernard and he stood up. "That is correct, Your Honor." Evelyn's composure cracked for a split second. It was subtle. Anyone else might have missed it. Judge Whitmore looked closely at Bernard. "And you followed this request?" "Yes," Bernard said, "at Mr. Hale's insistence." Gregory stood up again, with much more force this time. "Your Honor, this is hearsay on top of hearsay. There's no authentication, no chain of custody." "We will handle that later," the judge said. "Sit down." Gregory's jaw tightened, but he complied. I continued. "These materials include emails, drafts of trust amendments, and audio notes recorded by my father himself. He was deeply concerned about undue influence." Serafina let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous. My father loved our mother deeply." The judge glared at her. "Miss Hale, unless you are under oath, please restrain your comments." Serafina blushed and shut her mouth. I turned back to the bench. "I am not asking the court to accept these materials at face value today. I am asking for the opportunity to present them." Judge Whitmore leaned back, crossing his hands. "You will have that opportunity. But I warn you, Miss Hale, if these allegations prove to be unfounded, the consequences will be severe." "I understand," I said. "If they were unfounded, I wouldn't be standing here." A brief pause followed. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but a calculated one. "Very well," the judge said. "The court will hear preliminary testimony regarding the recent amendments to the estate. Mr. Vanton, call your witness." Gregory stood up slowly, straightening his jacket, regaining his composure inch by inch. "The defense calls Margaret Lowell." A woman in her late 60s walked toward the witness stand, her posture stiff, looking straight ahead. Margaret Lowell had been the family's private attorney for years, until Gregory merged her firm into his own. She knew all the secrets. "Ms. Lowell," Gregory began smoothly, "you served as legal counsel for Richard Hale, correct? Chanbia-chan? And you oversaw the signing of the final trust amendments?" "Chanbia-chan." "Were those amendments signed voluntarily?" "Chanbia-chan." "Was Mr. Hale of sound mind at the time?" "Chanbia-chan." Gregory smiled faintly. "No further questions." I stood up. Margaret's eyes darted toward me just once. There was something there, maybe regret, maybe fear. "Ms. Lowell," I said, "how long did you represent my father?" 22 years. "During that time, did you ever observe him make a major financial decision without consulting at least 2 independent advisors?" She hesitated. "No." Yet the final amendments were signed with only you and Mr. Vanton present. Is that correct? Gregory jumped up. Objection, mischaracterizing the facts. Margaret swallowed hard. Yes, she said quietly. So, no chief financial officer, no board oversight, no independent medical evaluation? Chan Bia-chan. I nodded. Ms. Lowell, was my father hospitalized at the time? Chan Bia-chan? Was he under sedation? Chan Bia-chan. Gregory slammed his hand on the table. Your Honor, enough. The judge said sharply, Watch your line of questioning, Miss Hale. I am, Your Honor. I turned back to Margaret. Did you inform my father that these amendments would effectively strip away my voting rights in Hale Dominion? Margaret's voice shook. I explained the documents as instructed. Instructed by whom? Silence. Instructed by whom, Ms. Lowell? Margaret looked at Gregory, then at Evelyn. By Mrs. Hale, she said. The entire energy in the room shifted. Evelyn stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. She is twisting the facts. Sit down, Judge Whitmore said, his voice ice-cold. Ms. Lowell, did Mr. Hale himself request these changes? Margaret closed her eyes. He did not initiate them. Serafina gasped. Margaret, what are you doing? Gregory looked like he was about to be sick. I let the moment settle in the air. Thank you, I said softly. I have no further questions. As Margaret stepped down from the stand, Evelyn leaned forward, whispering angrily to Gregory. He didn't reply. The judge called for a brief recess. Out in the hallway, reporters gathered outside the doors, whispering urgently into their phones. Bernard guided me to a quiet corner. You just put a crack in their foundation, he said. I know, I replied, but it won't hold unless we widen it. A few minutes later, Gregory walked out, his face tense. He ignored the media and walked straight toward us, with Evelyn and Serafina following behind. As he passed by, he stopped. You're playing with things you don't understand, he whispered. Do you think this ends well for you? I met his eyes. It already is. He smiled coldly. Confidence looks good on you, but it won't save you. When court reconvened, Judge Whitmore addressed the room with a seriousness that hadn't been there this morning. This court has heard enough testimony to warrant a deeper look into the circumstances surrounding the amendments to the Hale estate, he said. Miss Hale, you will be allowed to submit your materials for review. Mr. Vanton, your objections are noted. Gregory nodded stiffly. I am also ordering a temporary freeze on any additional asset transfers while this review takes place. Serafina jumped up. You can't do that. The judge locked eyes with her. I already have. The gavel fell, and for the first time since my father's funeral, I felt the balance of power shift. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was leverage. As the courtroom cleared, Bernard stepped close to me. They will push back. I know. They will come after you personally. I know. He studied my face. Are you ready? I thought about all those nights I spent alone after the funeral, listening to my father's recordings, hearing the exhaustion, the fear, and the determination in his voice. I've been ready much longer than they realize, I said. Outside, the sky had turned dark. A storm was coming, and between the thunder and the whispers, the script they had written for me was finally falling apart. The storm broke after midnight, and as the heavy rain poured down, I stayed awake. The water hit the windows relentlessly, as if the city were trying to wash away something dirty from the streets. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, my father's old leather notebook open in front of me, its pages warped from age and constant handling. I hadn't planned on opening it again tonight. I told myself I needed rest, clarity, and distance, but distance had become a luxury I couldn't afford. An hour earlier, Bernard Clay had insisted on watching me lock both doors and silence my phone before he left. They aren't used to resistance, he said before walking away, his voice calm but heavy. When people like Evelyn feel cornered, they stop pretending to be polite. I believed him. Evelyn Hale hadn't survived 30 years next to my father by being sentimental. I turned a page. Dates, initials, short and precise notes, all written in my father's neat handwriting. He never wasted words. Every line had a purpose. My finger ran over one entry, and my chest still tightened as I read it again. Pressure increasing, Evelyn pushing Gregory to move faster, demanding an accelerated change. I refused. I turned another page. Medical consultation arranged without my request. Cancelled it myself. They are unhappy. I breathed out slowly. This was why they moved so fast after he died, why I was locked out before the dirt on his grave was even dry. These notes weren't the ramblings of an unsound mind. These were the observations of a man who knew exactly how he was being manipulated and exactly who was doing it. My phone buzzed. I flinched despite myself. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. I let it ring. It stopped, then buzzed again. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Miranda." Evelyn's voice came through smoothly, as if we were discussing lunch plans instead of tearing each other apart in court. "We need to talk." "It's too late." "That never stopped you from calling your father." The line hit its mark perfectly. I closed my eyes. "What do you want?" I asked. "Enough of this charade," she said. "You embarrassed yourself today. You embarrassed the family." "You mean I embarrassed you?" A brief pause. Perfect timing. "You are making dangerous accusations," Evelyn said, "against the people who protected you your whole life." I let out a soft laugh. "You never protected me." "That's not true. I maintained stability for everyone." "For whom?" she demanded, the mask slipping. "Don't you realize the chaos you're causing? Hale Dominion employs tens of thousands of people. Investors are nervous and the board is whispering. Do you think they care about your feelings? This isn't about feelings." "Then what is it about?" she questioned. I looked down at my father's handwriting. "It's about the truth." Silence fell over the line, and then Evelyn sighed, her voice heavy with practiced disappointment. "Gregory can make all of this go away," she said quietly. "You can walk away with a generous settlement, honestly, more than your father ever intended for you to have." "And there it is," I said. "You can't win this," she continued. "Not alone, and certainly not against us. End this before you end up hurting yourself." I pictured her sitting in her perfectly decorated living room, phone pressed to her ear, convinced she was still the only adult in the room. "I'm not walking away," I said, "and you should stop calling me." She lowered her voice. "Miranda, you've always been fragile. Don't prove me right." The call clicked off. I stared at the phone for a long time before placing it face down on the table. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with me. I pushed the notebook away and stood up, pacing the small apartment until my breathing leveled out. That was their game. They press down right where it hurts, and then act surprised when you bleed. The next morning, the steps of the courthouse were packed by the time I arrived. Cameras, microphones, and reporters calling out my name as if they knew me. I didn't stop. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Word had spread. The clerks didn't even try to hide their staring now. A few even nodded as I passed. It wasn't exactly support, but it wasn't dismissal anymore either. Bernard met me outside the courtroom, his expression grim. "They filed a motion late last night," he whispered as we walked. "An emergency petition questioning your mental capacity to continue with this lawsuit." I stopped in my tracks. "They actually did it?" "Yes." "On what grounds?" Bernard tightened his lips. "Emotional instability, estrangement, and a documented history of treatment for anxiety." A cold weight sank into my stomach. "They're trying to ruin my reputation before I can present more evidence." "They're trying to disqualify you," Bernard corrected. "If they convince the court you're unreliable, nothing you submit will matter." Before I could respond, the bailiff signaled for us to step inside. By the time the judge entered, Gregory was already standing, his carefully rebuilt confidence back on display. Evelyn sat serenely beside him, hands folded, playing the part of a restrained, worried matriarch perfectly. Serafina looked bored again, scrolling through her phone until Gregory shot her a warning glance. Judge Whitmore took his seat. "We are in session regarding an emergency motion filed by the defense," he said. "Mr. Vanton." Gregory stepped forward. "Your Honor, we bring this motion with great reluctance and deep concern. Miss Hale has undergone immense emotional strain since her father's passing. Combined with her decision to proceed without legal representation while making increasingly absurd allegations, we believe the court has an obligation to evaluate her competency." I clenched my jaw. He continued, "Miss Hale has shown volatile emotional shifts, an obsession with conspiracy-style interpretations of standard estate planning, and a documented history of anxiety treatment." Evelyn dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue. The performance was almost impressive. "This is not an attack," Gregory said smoothly. "It is a protective measure." I stood up. "Your Honor." "Sit down, Miss Hale," Gregory snapped. "You will have your turn." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You don't run this courtroom, Mr. Vanton. Continue." Gregory nodded stiffly. "We ask for a temporary stay of proceedings pending a psychological evaluation." Serafina finally looked up, a spark of interest in her eyes. Judge Whitmore turned to me. "Miss Hale, your response?" I stood up slowly. The courtroom felt smaller, tighter. "They are asking you to silence me," I said. Not because I'm unstable, but because I'm in the way. Gregory scoffed. Pure speculation. No, I raised my voice slightly. It's strategy. I took a deep breath. My father anticipated this exact move. Gregory froze. He recorded his concerns that if I challenged the post-mortem changes to his estate, his wife and legal counsel would attempt to ruin my credibility, I continued. He took steps to preserve evidence completely outside of family control. I reached into my bag, pulled out a flash drive, and set it on the table. This contains several recordings my father made in the final months of his life, I said, including statements of his own mental competency and his fear of being declared incapacitated. Gregory lunged forward like a spring. Absolutely not. There is no foundation to— Enough, Judge Whitmore said sharply. He looked at me. Miss Hale, were these recordings made voluntarily by Mr. Hale? Yes. Were they recorded in a private residence? Yes. Do they contain statements relevant to this motion? Yes. The judge considered it for a long moment. I will allow the first recording to be played, he said, for a limited purpose only. Evelyn's composure shattered. Her fingers gripped her purse so hard her knuckles turned white. The bailiff took the flash drive and connected it to the courtroom audio system. A brief burst of static filled the room, and then my father's voice came through, clear and unmistakable. If you are hearing this, Richard Hale said, it means I didn't make it in time to stop them myself. A murmur ran through the gallery. I am of sound mind, he continued, and I know exactly what I am doing. I am recording this because my wife and her attorney have already begun pressuring me to make changes I do not agree with. Evelyn's face turned completely pale. They thought Miranda would be an easy target, my father's voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. Discredit her, label her as unstable. It's all a lie. My daughter is the only one asking the right questions. Serafina's mouth dropped open in shock. I am entrusting these materials to Bernard Clay, my father concluded. I want it on the record that if my competency is ever questioned, it won't be because I lacked it. It will be because someone wanted me out of the way. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Whitmore slowly took off his glasses. Mr. Vanton, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, this motion is denied. Gregory said nothing. Furthermore, the judge continued, any further attempts to question the plaintiff's mental health without substantial evidence will be met with sanctions. Evelyn's shoulders sank just a fraction. I sat back down, my heart pounding, my throat tight. I knew this was only the beginning. But this time, they had played their hand completely wrong. During the recess, Bernard leaned in close to me. You didn't just survive, he whispered. You turned their own weapon against them. I looked across the room at Evelyn, who now refused to meet my eyes. No, I said quietly. I just reminded them why they were afraid of my father in the first place. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw a ripple of actual fear pass through the very people who always thought they were untouchable. By the fourth day, when I walked into the courtroom, nobody was laughing anymore. Everyone was watching me. Every single step I took across that polished marble floor echoed louder than it should have. It wasn't because the room had grown larger, it was because the air had grown incredibly tight. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, phones were quickly slid into pockets, and even the reporters lining the back wall lowered their voices, as if sound itself had become evidence. Evelyn was already seated when I arrived. She looked composed, but not confident. Her posture was rigid, her hands folded a little too neatly in her lap, her chin held just a bit too high. Serafina sat next to her, pretending to look bored as she swiped through her phone, but under the table her knee was shaking uncontrollably. Gregory Vanton stood alone, reviewing documents with a frantic intensity. The perfect armor he usually wore so well was starting to show its seams. Bernard walked in right behind me, leaning down. They filed another motion at dawn, he whispered. This time it's about narrowing the scope of the financial audit. I nodded. They're trying to shrink the battlefield. Yes, he said, because they don't want you showing the judge the full map. The court rose as the judge entered. Judge Whitmore didn't waste any time. We are resuming the matter of the Hale Dominion estate, he said. Miss Hale, you may call your first witness. Gregory tensed up. I stood. I call Bernard Clay. A ripple of whispers ran through the gallery. Bernard adjusted his jacket and walked with steady, unhurried steps to the witness stand. He didn't look at Evelyn, and he didn't look at Gregory. He looked straight ahead, raised his right hand, and took the oath. Gregory was on his feet instantly. Your Honor, Mr. Clay's testimony has no relevance to the trust documents under review. He is neither a beneficiary nor a medical professional. Judge Whitmore remained completely unmoved. Sit down, Mr. Vanton. Relevance will be determined after the testimony is given. Gregory sat, his jaw tightly clenched. I walked slowly toward the witness stand. Bernard met my eyes, calm and reassuring. Mr. Clay, I began, how long did you work for my father? 31 years, he answered. The last 12 as his senior executive assistant. And during those years, were you involved in managing confidential financial information? Yes. Were you responsible for maintaining records related to the subsidiary structures of Hale Dominion? Yes. Gregory shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mr. Clay, I said, did my father ever discuss concerns with you regarding asset transfers happening without his approval? Bernard took a breath. Yes. And when did those concerns begin? Roughly 8 months before his passing. Evelyn's head snapped up. What specifically was he concerned about? I asked. Bernard's voice remained level. Funds were being rerouted to intermediary entities without his direct authorization. Offshore accounts, trust vehicles, none of which were part of the original estate plan. Gregory stood again. Objection, hearsay. Overruled, Judge Whitmore said. The witness has direct knowledge. Bernard continued. Mr. Hale believed that someone was accelerating the transfer of assets, taking advantage of his declining health. Did he specify who? I asked. He did. Bernard turned slightly, his wife and her legal counsel. The courtroom let out a collective gasp. Serafina began whispering frantically to Evelyn, but Evelyn didn't respond. Her eyes were locked onto Bernard now, cold and calculating. Mr. Clay, Gregory cut in sharply, unable to help himself, isn't it a fact that you were terminated shortly after these alleged concerns arose? Bernard turned to him. Yes. And isn't it a fact that you were fired for insubordination? No, Bernard replied. I was terminated because I refused to execute a wire transfer without Mr. Hale's written approval. Gregory's face flushed bright red. That is your personal interpretation. No, Bernard said calmly. It is a matter of record. I placed a folder on the table and slid it toward the bailiff. Exhibit C. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. What is this document? A wire authorization dated 3 weeks before my father's passing, I said. The signatory is Gregory Vanton, not Richard Hale. Gregory stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward. That document is privileged. This is a setup. The document was preserved by the executive office prior to my termination, Bernard said quietly. Judge Whitmore reviewed the page, then slowly looked up. Mr. Vanton, did you authorize this transfer? Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it. I was acting under implied authority. Whose implied authority? The judge asked. Gregory glanced at Evelyn. She didn't move an inch. Bernard spoke up again. That transfer moved $12 million into a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. The gallery erupted into heavy murmurs. Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel. Order! I took a deep breath. Mr. Clay, was this an isolated incident? No, Bernard said. There were multiple transfers, all following the exact same pattern. And were these entities disclosed in the final trust amendments? I asked. No. Gregory's confidence completely dissolved in an instant. He fumbled through his papers, looking for anything to save himself. Mr. Clay, I continued, did my father instruct you to preserve evidence related to these transactions? Yes. How? He requested that independent backup mirrors be stored securely and encrypted. Did he say why? Bernard's voice softened. He said, if they succeed in making me disappear on paper, at least the truth will still exist somewhere. For the first time, Evelyn's hand shook. Gregory made a weak objection. Speculation? Emotional testimony? Judge Whitmore ignored him. Proceed, Miss Hale. I nodded. Mr. Clay, did my father ever express fear regarding his own well-being? Bernard hesitated for a fraction of a second. Yes. The courtroom froze. He believed the pressure wasn't just financial, Bernard said. He believed people were using time against him. Serafina gasped. This is absurd! Judge Whitmore snapped his gaze to her. One more disruption, Miss Hale, and you will be removed. She shut her mouth. I have no further questions, I said. Gregory stumbled through his cross-examination. He walked toward Bernard like a man approaching a cliff edge, driven more by momentum than any real strategy. Mr. Clay, Gregory said sharply, you were fired. You were angry. Isn't it possible your testimony is motivated by resentment? No, Bernard said. Then what is it motivated by? Gregory demanded. Duty? Duty to whom? Gregory snapped. To the man who trusted me, Bernard replied, and to the company he didn't want to see stripped bare. Gregory raised his voice. And you expect this court to believe a decades-long conspiracy based on your word and a few documents? Bernard stared back, unfazed. No, I expect this court to believe the numbers. Silence. Gregory's shoulders slumped. No further questions. Bernard stepped down, and as he passed me, he whispered, "He would be proud of you." The judge called a recess, but nobody moved right away. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her face like a mask carved from porcelain. Serafina stared straight ahead, her eyes completely blank. Gregory retreated to a corner, locked in a fast, whispered argument with himself. In the hallway, the press surged forward, but court security held them back. Bernard and I stood by a window overlooking the city. "They're bleeding now," Bernard said, "but a wounded animal does dangerous things." "I know," I replied. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "The cost is just starting to go up." When we returned, Judge Whitmore addressed the room with a tone that made even Gregory sit up straight. "Based on today's testimony," he said, "this court finds sufficient cause to expand the scope of discovery. All offshore entities, shell companies, and trust vehicles associated with Hale Dominion are to be subjected to immediate mandatory disclosure." Evelyn snapped her head around. "Your Honor—" "Sit down," the judge said. "This court will not be kept in the dark." He turned to me. "Miss Hale, your actions have raised serious questions. Be aware that this path will not get any more comfortable for you." I met his gaze. "I didn't come here looking for comfort, Your Honor." The gavel fell. As the courtroom erupted back into the noise of people moving, I felt something shift. It wasn't victory, and it wasn't relief. It was momentum. For the first time in this room, power wasn't inherited, bought, or borrowed. It was earned, and I could feel it pulling the truth closer, whether they liked it or not. Their next move came quietly, which was how I knew it was serious. No emergency motions, no dramatic objections, just a sealed document filed after hours, buried under routine procedural language. Gregory Vanton had learned his lesson over the last few days. When noise fails, it's time to use leverage. Bernard noticed it first. "They're changing tactics," he said on the fifth morning, standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "This filing isn't about the money." I scanned the pages again. "It's about me." "Yes," I said slowly. "They're no longer trying to beat the evidence. They're trying to remove me from the equation entirely." Bernard nodded. "They are petitioning the court to appoint a guardian ad litem. They'll say it's temporary. They'll say it's neutral. But once that happens, you lose your voice." I closed my eyes for a moment. This was familiar territory. Not legally, but intentionally. Control disguised as concern. Erasure in the name of protection. "They're framing it as compassion," I said, "as if they're worried about my well-being." "They've always been worried," Bernard replied, "just never in a way that helps you." By the time we reached the courthouse, the story had already leaked. Not the details, just the premise. Reporters were whispering about mental health, about strain, about whether grief had clouded my judgment. I kept my head up as I walked past them, flashes firing, yelling out questions I didn't answer. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted again. Weighing heavier, feeling much more personal. Evelyn sat perfectly upright, a carefully constructed look of maternal concern on her face. She wore light blue, the color she always chose when she wanted to appear gentle. Serafina copied her posture, though the tension in her jaw gave her away. The moment the judge entered, Gregory stood up. "Your Honor," he began, "it is with great reluctance and concern that we bring this motion. Miss Hale has experienced immense emotional trauma following her father's passing. Combined with her decision to proceed without counsel, we believe the court has an obligation to ensure her interests are properly protected." I stayed right in my seat, completely still. Gregory continued, "We request the temporary appointment of a guardian to assist Miss Hale with these complex proceedings." Temporary, assist, protect. Every word was carefully chosen. Judge Whitmore turned to me. "Miss Hale, your response?" I stood up. "I am not asking the court to protect me," I said. "I am asking the court to hear me." Gregory shook his head slightly. "This isn't about silencing you, it's about ensuring fairness." "No," I said calmly, "it's an attempt to take away my autonomy since you can't take away my evidence." Evelyn let out a soft sigh, shaking her head. "Miranda, this isn't healthy. You're under too much pressure." Hearing my name come out of her mouth still carried that old weight. Old habits die hard. "Miss Hale," the judge said, "this motion asks the court to consider whether you can adequately represent your own interests." "I can," I said. Based on what? I took a deep breath. This was exactly where they wanted to push me. If I let it, doubt would start to creep in right here. Based on the fact that every major claim I've made has been backed by documentation, I said, and based on the fact that the timing of this sudden concern for my well-being matches up perfectly with the introduction of evidence that threatens the defense. Gregory cut in. Correlation is not causation. No, I agreed, but patterns are rarely an accident. The judge studied me. Miss Hale, the court must consider whether grief or stress has compromised your judgment. I won't deny the grief, I said, but grief doesn't forge wire transfers, fake authorizations, or hide offshore entities. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Your Honor, Gregory said sharply, this is turning into a platform for unsubstantiated claims. I turned to him. Then let's substantiate them. Silence. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thin folder, and set it on the table. I call Dr. Leonard Harris. Gregory froze. The judge looked surprised. Who is Dr. Harris? My father's independent primary care physician, I said. He is not affiliated with the hospital where my father received his final treatment, nor was he recommended by family counsel. Evelyn's composure completely fell apart. That doctor was dismissed, she shouted out. Yes, I said, right after he refused to sign a competency evaluation requested by your lawyers. Gregory slammed his hands down. This is highly inappropriate. Sit down, the judge said. Miss Hale, is the witness present? Yes. Dr. Harris walked into the courtroom, looking uncomfortable, like a man who wasn't used to this kind of spotlight. He took the oath with a slight tremble in his hand. Dr. Harris, I began, how long did you treat my father? 5 years, he answered. Were you consulted during the period when his estate documents were being amended? Yes. Did you ever diagnose him with cognitive impairment? No. Were you asked to do so? Dr. Harris hesitated, then nodded. Yes. By whom? By Mr. Vanton. The sound that followed was small but sharp, like something snapping in the room. Gregory stood up abruptly. Objection! That is a lie! Dr. Harris, the judge said calmly, answer the question. He asked me to evaluate Mr. Hale as lacking capacity, Dr. Harris said. When I refused, I was told my services were no longer required. Evelyn was whispering frantically to Serafina. Did you observe any signs that should have stripped my father of his decision-making power? I asked. No. Do you believe he understood the nature and consequences of his actions? Yes. I nodded. Thank you. Gregory's cross-examination was brief and clumsy. He tried to suggest bias, personal grievances, and professional embarrassment, but none of it stuck. Dr. Harris answered calmly and systematically, dismantling every alternative explanation Gregory threw at him. By the time he stepped down, the courtroom felt off balance, as if gravity itself had shifted. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Mr. Vanton, this court is deeply disturbed. Gregory said nothing. The plaintiff's credibility has been repeatedly questioned, the judge continued, and the evidence suggests those questions were raised for strategy rather than protection. That is a serious concern for this court. He turned to me. The motion to appoint a guardian is denied. Evelyn's shoulders visibly sagged. Furthermore, the judge added, if any more motions lacking real substance are filed, the court will consider sanctions. Gregory swallowed hard. The gavel fell. As we walked out into the hallway, Evelyn caught up with me. For the first time, she dropped the performance entirely. You have no idea what you're doing, she hissed. You're tearing everything apart. I looked at her, really looking at the woman who used to marginalize me with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. I'm making sure the truth doesn't need anyone's permission anymore. Serafina stood a few paces away, her eyes wide as she watched us. For the first time, she didn't look arrogant. She looked terrified. As we walked away, Bernard joined me. They lost that round badly, he said. Yes, I said. And now they're starting to get scared. I thought about my father's notes, the recordings, and the patterns that were finally coming together piece by piece. Scared of what comes next, I said. Outside, the city kept moving just like it always did. Cars honked, people hurried past, completely indifferent to our private war. But somewhere beneath all the noise, the ground was shaking, and they could already feel it. By the 6th day, the courtroom didn't feel like a place for arguments anymore. It felt like an excavation site. The morning light filtered through the high windows, cutting pale, indifferent beams through the dust floating above the polished wood and stone. I arrived earlier than usual, not because I needed more time, but because I needed the quiet. What lay ahead was no longer about strategy. It was about exposure. Bernard joined me silently, placing a thin stack of papers on the table between us. "This is where they can't pretend anymore," he said softly. "Once this goes public, they can't reframe it as a misunderstanding or a family dispute." I looked down at the top page. Transaction summaries, account numbers, dates arranged too cleanly to be an accident. "They move too fast," I said. "That's usually where the flaw is," Bernard nodded. "People who think they're untouchable never bother to slow down." On the other side of the room, Evelyn walked in with Serafina. They didn't sit down right away. Evelyn scanned the room, her eyes sharp, calculating exits that weren't physical. Gregory arrived last, his jaw tight, carrying far fewer binders than before. The weight he was carrying now wasn't paper. Judge Whitmore took his seat without any pleasantries. "We are back in session," he said. "Miss Hale, you may proceed." I stood up. "Your Honor," I began, "today I intend to address the matter of the hidden assets." Gregory let out a heavy breath through his nose, but remained seated. "These assets are not speculative," I continued. "They are documented, trackable, and were deliberately left out of the declared estate through a highly structured system." I submitted the first document into evidence. "Exhibit D," I said, "a corporate registration filing from the Cayman Islands." The bailiff passed copies forward. "This entity, called Blue Meridian Holdings," I said, "was established 18 months before my father's passing. The registered director is a nominee service company, and the beneficial owner was left undisclosed." Gregory rose halfway. "Many companies use nominee structures." "True," I said, "which is why that alone doesn't tell the whole story." I turned the page. Exhibit E, wire transfers from Hale Dominion Treasury accounts into Blue Meridian Holdings, 11 transactions totaling $34 million. Whispers broke out in the gallery. "These transfers were never disclosed in the trust amendments," I said, "nor were they authorized by the board." Gregory was fully on his feet now. "Objection! Those are business expenses." "Then let's talk about the timing," I responded. I pressed a button, and the screen behind me lit up with a timeline. "Every single transfer matches up perfectly with one of my father's medical emergencies," I said. "Hospitalizations, sedations, periods when he was physically present but legally vulnerable." Evelyn's fingers dug hard into her purse. "Mr. Clay," I said, "can you confirm if these transfers were flagged internally?" Bernard stood. "Yes, they were flagged as irregularities." "And what happened to the internal auditor who raised those questions?" I asked. "He was terminated." Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! This is just an emotional appeal." The judge's gaze cut right through him. "Sit down," I continued. "Hiding these assets wasn't about avoiding taxes. It was about avoiding scrutiny." I turned toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Hale," I said calmly, "are you familiar with Blue Meridian Holdings?" Evelyn stiffened. "No." "Did you ever authorize transfers to that entity?" "No." "Did you ever discuss it with Gregory Vanton?" "No." Gregory jumped up. "My client has answered." "Yes," I said, "she did." I turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I call a forensic accountant to the stand." A man in his 40s took the stand, looking calm and professional. He introduced himself as Daniel Reese. "Mr. Reese," I said, "did you review the financial materials associated with Hale Dominion at my request?" "Yes." "What was your conclusion?" "Substantial assets were moved into off-book structures." "Was there any documented legitimate business reason for this?" "No." Gregory tried to cross-examine him, but his questions were weak. Mr. Reese answered calmly and methodically, dismantling every alternative explanation. By the time he stepped down, the room felt heavier, as if the weight of the evidence was crushing them. I wasn't done yet. "Your Honor," I said, "these hidden assets matter not just because they change the value of the estate, but because of where they went next." I submitted another document, Exhibit F, Property Deeds. For the first time that day, I looked straight at Serafina. "These properties," I said, "were purchased in the name of Serafina Hale." Serafina snapped her head up. "That's a lie!" Judge Whitmore raised a hand. "Miss Hale, please remain quiet." "The funds used to purchase these properties," I continued, "came directly from Blue Meridian Holdings." Serafina stood up suddenly. "I didn't know where the money came from." Evelyn reached up to pull her down, but it was already too late. "Miss Hale," the judge said sternly, "sit down." Serafina fell back into her chair, her face completely pale. Gregory stood up, his voice shaking. "Your Honor, even if these allegations are accurate, they don't prove any wrongdoing by my clients. They only prove that things were kept private." "They prove concealment," the judge replied, "and this court takes that very seriously." I took a deep breath. This was the edge. Your Honor, I said, there is one final piece. The courtroom fell dead silent. These transactions weren't just hidden, I said. They were rushed. I turned to the screen. 3 days before my father passed away, I continued, an irrevocable trust was activated. That trust transferred the remaining liquid assets out of Hale Dominion's direct control. Gregory's face lost all its color. That trust, I said, was signed and executed while my father was heavily sedated. Evelyn whispered, No. Mr. Clay, I asked, did my father authorize that activation? No. Was he conscious? No. Absolute total silence. Judge Whitmore placed both hands on the bench and leaned forward. Miss Hale, he said slowly, are you alleging that someone took advantage of your father's incapacitation to execute these asset transfers? Yes, I said, that is exactly what I'm alleging. Gregory spoke, his voice no longer smooth. This is a civil suit. She is crossing the line into criminal implications. The judge didn't even look at him. This matter is no longer appropriate for a standard civil track, Judge Whitmore said. The evidence presented today points toward potential financial crimes. Evelyn's breathing was shallow and fast now. Serafina stared at the table as if it might swallow her whole. I am ordering an immediate freeze on all financial records, the judge continued, and I will be referring these findings to the proper authorities for criminal review. Gregory stood up, panic finally breaking through. Your Honor, sit down, the judge said, his voice hard as iron. You had ample opportunity to explain these transactions, and you chose to deflect. The gavel fell, loud and final, as the courtroom erupted into hushed chaos. I remained standing. This was the line, the one you can never walk back from. Bernard stepped close to me. Once federal investigators step in, he whispered, there is no quiet ending to this. I know, I said. Evelyn finally looked at me, not with anger and not with contempt, but with pure fear. As we left the courtroom, reporters swarmed us, shouting questions about offshore accounts and hidden trusts. I didn't answer. Outside, the sky was low and gray, and the city seemed to be holding its breath. I thought about my father, and how carefully he had documented everything, knowing that nobody would protect him except the truth itself. They thought this was just about an inheritance. They were wrong. This was about what happens when power assumes nobody is watching. And now everyone was watching. On the 7th day, the silence that greeted me was different. It wasn't the guarded quiet of people bracing for an impact, or the tense stillness of a room waiting for a show. It was heavier than that, like the air freezing right before something irreversible happens. Nobody was smiling when I came in. Gregory Vanton sat rigidly at the defense table, his tie slightly crooked, his fingers tapping once against his legal pad before he forced himself to stop. Evelyn kept her head down, studying a document she had clearly read a dozen times already. Serafina looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched, her confidence draining away through the cracks she could no longer hide. They weren't preparing an argument anymore. They were bracing themselves. As I took my seat, Bernard leaned toward me. They didn't sleep, he whispered. Neither did Gregory. I know, I said quietly. He has nowhere left to hide. Judge Whitmore walked in without any hesitation. No small talk, no warnings. He looked like a man who had made up his mind to follow the evidence wherever it led, even if he didn't like where it ended. Miss Hale, he said after the bailiff called the room to order, you may proceed. Gregory stood up immediately. Your Honor, before the plaintiff continues her narrative, the defense wishes to raise a critical issue. The word narrative landed like an insult disguised as legal jargon. This court has heard a series of dramatic claims, Gregory continued, many of which rely on selective documents and highly emotional testimony. We believe it is necessary to examine the reliability of the plaintiff as a narrator of these events. I didn't move an inch. Gregory turned toward me, his voice sharp. Miss Hale has repeatedly framed standard corporate and medical decisions as a conspiracy, forcing patterns where none exist and inventing intent where none can be proven. He faced the judge. At this point, Your Honor, the court must consider whether these allegations stem from objective evidence or from unresolved psychological distress. Evelyn looked up right on cue, putting on a perfect expression of concern. Serafina swallowed hard. Judge Whitmore looked right at me. Miss Hale, I stood up slowly. For days, I said. They've tried to prove my documents are fake. I looked straight at Gregory. Now they're trying to prove I'm unreliable. Gregory scoffed. A highly convenient interpretation. No, I said. It was entirely expected. I turned back to the bench. Your Honor, I don't need to give an opinion. I don't need a character assessment. I have my father's voice. Before anyone could say a word, the room reacted. Chairs scraped the floor and a sharp gasp echoed from the gallery. Gregory jumped up like a spring. Absolutely not! Judge Whitmore held up a hand. On what grounds, Mr. Vanton? Lack of foundation, Gregory said, his words tripping over each other. Lack of authentication. Irrelevance. This is a civil proceeding, not a theater stage for audio drama. It is relevant, I said calmly, because the exact things they claim I'm imagining are the things my father explicitly warned me about. The judge studied me. Miss Hale, explain the origin of this recording. It was recorded by my father, I said, in his home, on his own equipment, because he was afraid. Gregory let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Afraid of what? His own wife? I didn't look at him. Afraid of being erased while he was still alive. The judge leaned forward. Does this recording directly address the allegations raised today? Yes. Does it mention his mental state? Yes. Does it name specific individuals? Yes. The courtroom held its collective breath. Play it, Judge Whitmore said. Gregory's face lost all color. The bailiff crossed the room and connected the flash drive. The slight click of the speakers powering on sounded incredibly loud. Then, my father's voice filled the space. If this recording is being played in a courtroom, Richard Hale said evenly, it means things have gone wrong. Evelyn's gasp was clearly audible. I am making this statement with full awareness of my actions, my father continued. I am not confused, I am not impaired, and I am not changing my estate because I want to. Serafina's eyes widened. I am under pressure, he said, repeatedly pressed by my wife and her attorney to accelerate decisions I do not agree with. Gregory shook his head, whispering, No! They are telling me my daughter Miranda is mentally unstable, my father said, that she cannot be trusted and should be cut out of the loop. I felt a tightness in my chest. It's a lie, he continued. She is the only one asking why the timeline doesn't make sense. The recording paused for a beat, then continued. If anything happens to me, my father said softly, it won't be because my heart failed. It will be because I became an obstacle. The silence that followed was suffocating. Judge Whitmore slowly took off his glasses. Gregory stood up, his voice tense. Your Honor, this recording is deeply disturbing, but it proves nothing. Fear is not evidence. I spoke up before the judge could answer. Then let's listen to the rest. Gregory snapped his head toward me. There is no rest. There is, I said. I nodded to the bailiff, and the second recording began. They suggested I sign documents after being sedated, my father said. They told me it was routine, temporary. It wasn't. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. They're in a rush, he said, because once the trust becomes irrevocable, I can't change it. And they know I wouldn't sign if I were fully awake. Serafina whispered, Mom, I no longer trust Gregory, my father continued, and I no longer trust my wife to protect my interests. The judge sat up straight. If you are listening to this, my father said, understand that any claim that I was not of sound mind is a lie. The recording ended. The courtroom felt empty, like something had been ripped away. Gregory stood rigid, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. Judge Whitmore spoke, his voice low. Mr. Vanton, did you advise your client to sign estate documents while sedated? Gregory swallowed hard. I advised him on the legal efficiency of... That wasn't my question. Evelyn stood up suddenly. Your Honor, Richard was sick, he was afraid, and he said things he didn't mean. I turned to her. Did he mean them when he warned you not to rush? Evelyn's voice caught. He didn't understand the urgency. Urgency for what? I asked. She couldn't answer. Serafina stood up abruptly. Stop it, this isn't fair! Judge Whitmore raised his voice. Sit down. Serafina fell back into her chair, tears spilling over. I didn't look at her. Your Honor, even if these recordings are real, they don't prove wrongdoing. They only prove anxiety. They prove premeditation, the judge replied, and intent. He turned to me. Miss Hale, you are no longer making insinuations. You are making accusations. Yes, I said. I am accusing them of taking advantage of my father's declining health. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. This court cannot ignore this. He paused, then said the words that completely changed the temperature of the room. I am expanding the scope of these proceedings. The circumstances surrounding the death of Richard Hale will be reviewed. Evelyn gasped. Gregory stumbled back into his chair. I am also ordering the preservation of all medical records. the judge continued, and notifying the proper authorities. Whispers erupted in the gallery. Serafina covered her face with both hands. Evelyn leaned toward Gregory, her voice shaking. This was never supposed to be played. Gregory didn't answer. As the gavel struck, I felt a shift deep inside. It wasn't relief and it wasn't victory. It was resolve. They had buried his voice, sealing it away behind legal jargon and polite concern. But they forgot one thing. The dead still speak when someone is brave enough to listen. And right now, the court was listening. The courtroom didn't feel like a place for a trial anymore. It felt like a crime scene that had finally been noticed. People spoke in lower voices, as if volume itself would bring trouble. Even the reporters, usually restless and predatory, didn't seem to know where to stand, where to point their lenses, or exactly what kind of story they were witnessing unfold. I sat at the table, hands folded, my heart beating with a stability that surprised even me. This was no longer a fight over an inheritance. This was about survival. When Judge Whitmore opened the session, there were none of the usual introductions, no reminders, no patience. "Miss Hale," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "the evidence you have brought forward raises issues that go far beyond a civil dispute. Before this court proceeds, I need clarity. Are you alleging wrongdoing surrounding your father's passing?" The question landed heavily. Gregory went rigid. Evelyn held her breath. Serafina looked between them like a child who just realized the house was on fire. "I am not drawing conclusions," I said carefully. "I am stating the contradictions." The judge nodded. "Proceed." I stood up and walked to the center of the room, not to the podium but to the open space between the two tables. "Richard Hale was admitted to St. Alden's Medical Center on a Friday," I said. "The official cause of death was listed as complications from heart failure 3 days later." I flipped to the next slide on the screen behind me. What this report does not explain is why his condition was described as stable, only to deteriorate so rapidly without any corresponding medical trigger. Gregory rose halfway. "Your Honor, Miss Hale is not a doctor." "She is not," the judge replied, "but she is permitted to state the facts." I continued. "On the night before my father passed away," I said, 3 decisions were made. 1 financial, 1 legal, and 1 medical. I paused. All 3 decisions benefited the exact same people. The room went dead silent. I pointed to the timeline projected behind me. At 11:42 p.m., I said, a trust amendment was submitted digitally. At 12:10 a.m., my father was administered a sedative that was not previously part of his treatment plan. At 1:05 a.m., visitation access was restricted. Evelyn shook her head violently. "This is outrageous." "Mrs. Hale," Judge Whitmore warned, "do not interrupt." I turned to Evelyn. "You signed the restriction order." She froze. "That's not true," she said weakly. I held up the document. "Your signature is right here." Serafina's eyes widened. "Mom," Evelyn's composure shattered in that single instant. "The doctor advised it." "Which doctor?" I asked. She hesitated. Gregory cut in. "Your Honor, this is becoming a speculative narrative." "No," the judge said. "It is forming a pattern." I shifted focus. "Your Honor, I want to address the medical aspect directly. I call my next witness." Dr. Elaine Morrison took the stand, her posture stiff and her expression guarded. She was the attending physician on the final night of my father's life. "Dr. Morrison," I began, "how long were you treating my father?" "Less than 24 hours. Prior to that, he had been under the care of his regular physician, Dr. Harris?" I asked. "Yes," I nodded. "Did Dr. Harris recommend the sedative used that night?" "No." "Did you recommend it?" Dr. Morrison swallowed hard. "I was following instructions." "Whose instructions?" I asked softly. Her gaze flicked toward Evelyn, then Gregory. "I was told it was a family request," she whispered. Gregory jumped up. "Objection! This is coercive questioning." "Overruled," the judge said. "Answer the question." Dr. Morrison's voice shook. "Mrs. Hale and Mr. Vanton expressed concern that Mr. Hale was becoming agitated." "Agitated?" I repeated. "Or was he resisting?" Dr. Morrison didn't answer. "Was that sedative medically necessary?" I asked. "No," she whispered. A buzz broke out in the courtroom. Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel. "Order!" I took a deep breath, grounding myself. "Dr. Morrison," I continued, "after that sedative was administered, was my father capable of giving informed consent?" "No." "And yet, during that window the documents were signed," I said, turning to the judge. "That is not a coincidence." Evelyn stood up suddenly, her voice hoarse. "You are twisting everything. He was sick and we were trying to help him." "Help him sign away what you needed?" I said. Serafina bolted upright. "Stop attacking my mother!" "Sit down!" Judge Whitmore roared. Serafina collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. I didn't look at her. "Your Honor," I said, "there is one more contradiction." I switched the slide. "The death certificate lists the time of death as 3:15 a.m., I said, "but the final medication logs show a dosage was administered at 3:20 a.m. Dr. Morrison's face lost all its color. "That's impossible," the judge whispered. "Yes, I believe so too, it's impossible." Gregory's voice rose, sharp with panic. "This is ridiculous! A typographical error!" "Perhaps," I said, "or perhaps the timeline was altered." The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Dr. Morrison," he said, "did you alter any medical records?" She shook her head violently. "No." "Were you asked to?" he pressed. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes." The courtroom froze. "By whom?" the judge demanded. She whispered, "Mr. Vanton." Gregory stumbled back as if struck by lightning. "That's a lie!" he shouted. Judge Whitmore didn't look at him. "This court has heard enough," the judge said slowly. "Miss Hale, your presentation raises serious questions regarding the circumstances of Richard Hale's passing." He paused, then said the words that changed everything. "I am referring this matter for criminal investigation." Evelyn let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream. Serafina was sobbing openly now, her hands shaking. Gregory stood, his former confidence completely gone. "Your Honor, you can't do this." "I can," the judge said coldly, "and I am." He turned to the bailiff. "Contact the relevant federal authorities. This court is stayed until this matter is addressed." The gallery erupted. Phones were pulled out, messages sent, and whispers turned into frantic discussions. I remained standing, perfectly still. Bernard leaned toward me, his voice barely audible. "Once you cross this line, there's no controlling what happens next." "I know," I said. Evelyn finally looked at me, really looked at me, her eyes filled with frantic terror. "You ruined us," she whispered. I met her gaze. "You ruined yourselves when you rushed him to his end just to clear your path." The gavel struck one last time, echoing like a gunshot. As we filed out, the air felt thin and electric. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Not for us yet, but it would be soon. They thought they were racing against time. They never realized time was the only thing that would expose them. And now, it wasn't just the family watching anymore. The truth was on the record, and records have a way of calling down their own consequences. When I arrived at the courthouse the next morning, the building didn't belong to the Hale family anymore. It belonged to the state. Uniformed officers stood at every entrance, their presence calm but unyielding. Metal detectors had been added overnight. People lined up in silence, eyes darting around, whispers cutting off under the weight of what everyone knew was coming. This was no longer a private war over an inheritance or family pride. It had crossed completely into another realm. Bernard walked beside me, his face blank. He had probably slept 2 hours, if that. I could tell by the rigid set of his shoulders, as if he were bracing for an impact. "They're here," he said softly as we approached the security checkpoint. "I know," I replied. "In the lobby, I noticed them immediately. Not reporters, not lawyers, but men and women in dark suits. They stood slightly apart from everyone else, watching without pretense. Their posture was a little out of place in a courtroom. Too alert, too neutral. Federal agents. Inside the courtroom, the air hummed with a tension that felt both electric and dangerous. Gregory was already seated, but the man I saw looked nothing like the polished lawyer who had smirked at me days ago. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his briefcase sat unopened at his feet. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, as if even moving would draw attention. Evelyn arrived a few minutes later with Serafina walking beside her. The gentle expression my stepmother usually maintained was gone. Her eyes swept the room sharply, looking for exits that no longer existed. Serafina looked pale, her confidence completely gone, her fingers twisting together in her lap. Judge Whitmore entered without delay. "Please be seated," he said, his voice carrying a gravity I hadn't heard before. Nobody spoke. Before he could continue, the side door opened. 2 people walked in, followed by another pair. Their credentials were out in the open now, hanging plainly from their jackets. The hum in the gallery grew noticeably louder. Judge Whitmore didn't look surprised. "For the record," he said calmly, "please state your names and agency." The woman leading the group spoke first, her voice steady and precise. "Allison Grant, Special Agent, Securities and Exchange Commission." The man beside her followed immediately. Daniel Ross, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room went dead silent. Gregory's head snapped up. Evelyn's breathing turned shallow and fast. Serafina put her hand over her mouth. Judge Whitmore gave a single nod. "You may proceed." Agent Grant stepped forward. "Your Honor, based on the evidence brought forward in this court, the SEC has opened a formal investigation into Hale Dominion and its subsidiary entities. Effective immediately, all accounts, trusts, and subsidiary holdings associated with the Hale estate are subject to an asset freeze." The words hit like a physical blow. Serafina whispered, "What does that mean?" Evelyn didn't answer. Gregory stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. My clients have not been charged with anything." Agent Ross turned to him calmly. "Not yet." The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Mr. Vanton." Gregory sat, his face turning pale. Agent Ross continued. "Furthermore, the FBI is opening a parallel criminal investigation into potential financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and wrongdoing surrounding the passing of Richard Hale." The sound Evelyn made wasn't a word. It was more like the cracking of a foundation giving way. Serafina was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. I remained seated, hands folded in front of me, my heart beating fast but steady. Judge Whitmore turned his attention to me. "Miss Hale, in light of these developments, I must ask you directly. Are you prepared to continue with these proceedings, understanding that any evidence you present may carry criminal implications?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. Agent Grant glanced at me, her eyes assessing. "Miss Hale, your cooperation thus far has been noted." Gregory leaned toward Evelyn, whispering frantically. She shook her head, her eyes wide. Judge Whitmore addressed the room. "This court will stay any further civil arguments regarding the division of assets until the federal agencies have completed their preliminary review." Gregory jumped up again. "Your Honor, my clients assert their Fifth Amendment rights." Agent Ross gave a slight nod. "That is your right." The judge's voice was cold. "You are free to assert that right, but in a civil capacity, this court is equally free to draw the appropriate inferences." Gregory swallowed hard. Evelyn stared straight ahead, her hands gripping her knees. Serafina looked from her mother to Gregory, her face filled with panic. "What's happening?" Nobody answered her. Agent Grant turned back to the bench. "We will require access to all corporate records, including board minutes, internal audits, and correspondence involving Mr. Vanton." Gregory's voice turned raspy. "You can't do that without—" "Mr. Vanton," Agent Ross interrupted, "you might want to secure independent counsel." The implication hung heavily in the air. Gregory said nothing. Judge Whitmore turned back to me. "Miss Hale, until further notice, the court will appoint a temporary receiver to oversee the Hale Dominion estate." Bernard tensed beside me. "However," the judge continued, "given your role in bringing these matters to light, you will remain a central witness in these proceedings." I nodded and the gavel fell. The courtroom dissolved into controlled chaos. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Court officers moved quickly to maintain order. Evelyn stood up suddenly, turning toward me, her voice cutting through the noise. "You did this!" I met her gaze. "I just told the truth." Gregory grabbed her arm. "We need to leave now." They didn't get far before Agent Ross stepped into their path. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Vanton, we need a quick word." Evelyn's face drained of color. Serafina clung to her mother's sleeve. "Mom!" Evelyn pulled her close instinctively, her eyes darting around. "It's just procedural," Gregory managed, forcing a smile that convinced no one. "A misunderstanding." Agent Grant didn't smile back. Cameras flashed wildly as they were escorted into a side room. I stayed in my seat until the room began to clear out. Bernard stepped close, his voice low. "It stops being theoretical from here," he said. "There's no public relations spin that fixes this." "I know." Outside, the courthouse steps were packed. Flashes crossed, microphones were pushed toward me, and voices called out my name. I stopped at the top of the stairs. For the first time since this started, I turned to face them. "I'm not here to give a statement," I said calmly. "I'm here because my father deserved the truth." Questions poured in, but I didn't answer. As Bernard guided me away, I caught a glimpse through the glass doors. Gregory was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. Evelyn stood rigid, talking rapidly to an agent who just listened without reacting. Serafina sat alone, crying quietly. The family portrait had shattered, and there was no glue strong enough to piece it back together. Later that evening, as news updates flooded my phone, Bernard and I sat in silence. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," he finally said. "I know. They're going to dig into everything. I want them to." He looked at me closely. "You aren't afraid?" I thought about my father's voice, the recordings, and the way he had prepared for this exact moment. "I was afraid when I thought nobody was listening," I said. "But that's over now." Outside, helicopters circled over the city, their distant hum a reminder that this story didn't belong to the Hale family anymore. It belonged to the public. And once the truth reaches that stage, it stops asking for permission. It just keeps moving forward, relentless and unstoppable. The boardroom smelled like cold coffee and panic. I could feel it the moment the elevator doors opened on the executive floor of Hale Dominion. Phones were ringing behind glass walls. Assistants whispered urgently, cutting off the moment they saw me. The screens along the hallway flicked with downward red arrows and breaking news headlines, each one another blow to a company that days ago thought it was untouchable. Hale Dominion stock halted pending federal review. Family trusts frozen in SEC probe. Lawful heir steps forward as scandal deepens. I walked straight through it, keeping my pace steady. Bernard followed half a step behind me, a habit he hadn't broken even now. "The board is already inside," he said softly. "They tried to call the meeting without you." I gave a single nod. "They can't adjourn without me." The double doors to the boardroom were closed, but the sound of raised voices leaked through the wood. I didn't knock. I pushed them open. The room went silent instantly. 12 people sat around the long walnut table. Most of the men were old enough to remember when my father used to work with his sleeves rolled up. Their suits were immaculate, but the confidence behind them was cracked. Laptops were open, and legal pads were covered in rushed notes. One man rubbed his temples as if he'd been doing it for hours. At the head of the table sat Conrad Price, the acting chairman. His jaw was set tight. "This meeting is private," he said sharply. "You aren't authorized." "I am," I replied, stepping fully into the room. "As of this morning." Bernard placed a folder on the table beside me. "Court order," he said calmly, "granting Miss Hale temporary voting rights during the receivership review." Conrad snatched the papers, scanning them as his face darkened. "This is temporary." "Everything is temporary," I said. "Sit down." He hesitated, then took his seat. I didn't take my father's chair. Not yet. I stood at the end of the long table, hands resting lightly on the back of the seat to steady myself. "I know what you're thinking," I said. "You think this is a mistake. You think I don't belong here and that I'm a liability." Nobody contradicted me. "You're wrong," I continued. "I am the only reason this company still exists." A few heads snapped up. "If the federal agencies find that Hale Dominion is continuing to operate under leadership associated with fraud," I said, "they can dismantle it piece by piece, freeze operations, liquidate assets, and lay off thousands of people." I let the words settle in the air. "The only reason they haven't," I added, "is because the court believes there is a way forward." Conrad scoffed. "And that way forward is you?" "Yes." The word was sharp and final. An older board member leaned forward. "With respect, Miranda, this company is bleeding. Investors are panicking and banks are pulling credit lines." "I know," I said. "I've read every report you've seen and a few you haven't." I nodded to Bernard. He connected a tablet to the screen at the end of the room. A spreadsheet appeared, rows of numbers scrolling past. "These," I pointed, "are the offshore subsidiaries quietly propping up our domestic balance sheets. Accounts my father flagged years ago but never closed because he didn't want to disrupt the workforce." A murmur ran around the table. "They are frozen now," I continued, "which means if nothing changes we have exactly 3 weeks of liquidity left." Conrad leaned back, crossing his arms. "Then we sell." "No," I said. A few nervous laughs broke out. "No," Conrad repeated, "you don't understand how this works." "I understand exactly how this works," I said. "If you sell now, you confirm every accusation. You admit to the panic. You turn suspicion into certainty." A woman sitting near the middle of the table spoke up. "What's your alternative?" I took a deep breath. "我们把毒瘤切掉." We cut out the rot. I clicked to the next slide. "This is an internal audit commissioned by my father 6 months before he passed," I said. "He never shared it with the board because he wasn't ready to blow everything up yet." Names appeared on the screen, highlighted in red. 3 senior executives, I said. 2 long-term vendors. A consulting firm with no actual employees, but a very impressive history of invoices. Conrad's face went rigid. "These are serious accusations." They are documented, I replied. Kickbacks, inflated contracts, siphoning revenue, all happening before my stepmother even exerted her influence. A man near the end of the table stood up suddenly. You can't just throw accusations around. I can, I said quietly, and I am. I leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Resign, I said. Today, quietly, in exchange for cooperation. The room erupted. This is extortion. This is crazy. You're threatening us. I waited until the anger burned itself out. I am giving you an opportunity, I said, because if the authorities find this before we act, there won't be a negotiation. There will just be indictments. Conrad stared at the screen, then looked at me. And if we refuse? I met his gaze without blinking. Then I hand all of this over. Let them decide who stays and who goes. The room went dead silent. Finally, Conrad let out a slow breath. You're playing a dangerous game. I didn't start it, I said. I'm just ending it. One by one, hands started to lower and eyes turned down. Nobody wanted to be the first to challenge me anymore. We need stability, the woman said softly, for the employees. I nodded. Exactly. Bernard stepped forward. Miss Hale is also requesting the establishment of an employee protection fund. Pensions will be prioritized and payroll will be secured. A few heads looked up at that. That's not standard procedure, Conrad said. No, I agreed, but it's necessary. I finally walked to my father's chair and sat down. The seat felt warm as if it still remembered him. This company was built by people who trusted him, I said. He didn't treat them like numbers, neither will I. I looked around the table. You have a choice, I said. Work with me, clean up the mess and save Hale Dominion, or fight me and watch it burn. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then, Conrad slowly stood up. I'll submit my resignation. One by one, the others followed his lead. The meeting ended in a stunned, heavy silence. Hours later, I was alone in my father's office. Outside the window, the city lights blinked in the dark, and I finally let myself sit still. Bernard stood quietly by the door. They'll try to tear you down, he said. I know. They'll leak stories, question your authority, try to make you look weak. I know. He hesitated for a second. You didn't have to protect them. I looked out at the city skyline. I wasn't protecting them, I said. I was protecting the people who never had a voice in all of this. Bernard gave a single nod. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I could feel the full weight of the company settling onto my shoulders. The courtroom was just a battle. This was the war. I wasn't just defending a legacy anymore. I was responsible for rebuilding it. I woke up long before sunrise, not because of a sound, but because my body simply refused to rest. The penthouse was wrapped in that strange, hollow quiet that only exists in the early hours of the morning, when the city hasn't yet decided what kind of day it's going to be. I lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own slow, deliberate breathing, trying to convince myself that I was safe. I wasn't, not even close. Everything we had uncovered over the last few weeks, everything dragged out into the light, was balancing on a razor's edge. The evidence was sealed, the statements were recorded, and arrests were imminent. And that is exactly when people like Gregory Vanton become the most dangerous. People who have spent their entire lives manipulating the system don't just accept the consequences gracefully. They strike back. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and walked barefoot across the cold marble floor, the city lights still flickering faintly outside the glass. My father's old desk clock sat on the table near the window, its soft ticking steady and cold. I had brought it from his office after the board meeting, unable to leave it behind. The sound grounded me. Time was moving forward, whether they liked it or not. I poured a glass of water, and just as I set it down, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was Bernard. I answered instantly. Go ahead. His voice was low and tense. They intercepted him. My grip on the glass tightened. Gregory? Yes, a private airfield outside the city, less than an hour ago. I closed my eyes briefly. What did he have? Cash, burner phones, documents he was never supposed to possess. Of course, I said. Is he in custody? For now, yes. But Miranda, Bernard hesitated. There's more. A knot tightened in my chest. Tell me. He wasn't running alone. I leaned against the counter. Who? Your stepmother, Bernard said quietly. She wasn't on the plane, but the communication logs show coordination, timing, instructions. I felt something cold sink into my stomach. It wasn't shock, it was confirmation. She always did prefer to let others handle the dirty work. Yes, Bernard replied. And Miranda, they found something else. I waited. A private storage unit Gregory kept under a false name, he said. Federal agents opened it during the sweep, and inside, there was a recorder. The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the floor. For a moment, neither of us said a word. A recorder? I repeated. Yes, Bernard said. They believe it belonged to your father. My throat felt dry. I thought we found all the recordings. So did I. I sat down heavily in the chair by the window. The shards of glass glinted on the floor like tiny cracks of light. What's on it? We don't know yet, Bernard said. They're bringing it back. They want you there when they review it. Why? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because it was left for you. The agents arrived just as the sun was coming up. This time there was no loud knocking, just a controlled professional presence. 2 FBI agents, 1 SEC agent. Agent Ross was there, his expression serious but respectful. Miss Hale, he said as I let them in, thank you for meeting on such short notice. I don't really have a choice, I replied softly. He didn't deny it. They placed the recorder in the middle of the kitchen table, sealed inside an evidence bag. It looked small, insignificant, just a black rectangle of plastic and metal. It had no idea how much power it held. We believe Gregory removed this from the study within 24 hours of your father's passing, Agent Ross said. Our assumption is that he didn't know what was on it, only that it was dangerous. Did he listen to it? I asked. Agent Grant shook her head. No indication he did. If he had, he likely would have destroyed it instead of hiding it. I swallowed hard. Play it. Agent Ross broke the seal and pressed the button. After a brief burst of static, my father's voice filled the room. It wasn't the calm, calculated tone from the earlier recordings. This was different. He sounded exhausted. If you're listening to this, Miranda, my father said softly, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you everything myself. My hands locked together, trembling slightly. I don't have much time, he continued, and I need to be very clear. There was a pause, a faint shuffling sound as if he were shifting in his chair. I believe my life is in danger, he said. Agent Grant's jaw tightened. Not from illness, my father continued, not from age, but because someone decided I am in the way. I closed my eyes. I've made mistakes, he said. I trusted people because they said the right things, wore the right suits, and smiled at the right times. He let out a bitter sigh. I trusted your stepmother, he said. I trusted Gregory Vanton to protect my interests when I could no longer fight every battle myself. My nails dug deep into my palms. That trust was misplaced. The recorder clicked, then continued. They are rushing me, my father said, pressuring doctors, changing schedules, trying to get me to sign papers while I'm unresponsive. I felt tears slip down my cheeks, quiet and unstoppable. I want it on the record, he continued, his voice stronger now, that I did not authorize any changes to my medication. I did not agree to the trust amendments submitted in my name, and I did not approve of isolating my daughter from me. Agent Ross exhaled slowly. If anything happens to me, my father said, it is not an accident. The silence that followed the recording was heavy enough to touch. Agent Ross spoke first. This establishes intent and foresight. Agent Grant nodded. Combined with the medical discrepancies and the financial motive, this moves the case into a completely different category. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. Give it to me straight. Agent Ross didn't hesitate. We are formally upgrading the investigation to a homicide case. The word hit like a physical blow. For a second I couldn't breathe. Homicide. Not negligence, not misconduct. Homicide. They ended his life, I whispered. Yes, Agent Grant said gently, and in the process they left a clear trail. I stared at the recorder, my father's final words echoing in my mind. Did he know? Yes, Agent Ross said. He knew enough and he tried to protect you. The agent stood up, giving me some space. There will be arrests today, Agent Ross said, and the indictments will be unsealed. I nodded numbly. After they left, I sat alone for a long time. The city was fully awake now, cars honking, people rushing to lives that hadn't shattered overnight. I picked up the recorder, pressed play again, and let his voice fill the room one more time. Right at the very end, there was a faint, nearly inaudible whisper I hadn't caught before. I'm proud of you, he said, because you notice the details everyone else ignores. And that was the moment I completely broke down. Later that afternoon, the news exploded. Evelyn Hale was arrested at her residence, let out in handcuffs as camera flashes flared, and neighbors watched from behind drawn curtains. Serafina was taken in for questioning, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses as her world collapsed in real time. Gregory Vanton was charged before sunset. First-degree murder, conspiracy and fraud on a scale that left headlines struggling for words. I watched the press conference from my father's office at Hale Dominion, with Bernard standing quietly behind me. "They're mentioning your name," he said. "I don't need them to," I replied. When the screen went black, I stood up and looked out over the city. The same city that had nearly consumed my father entirely. They thought they could erase him quietly. They were wrong. 他们以为我会保持沉默。他们在这一点上也错了。They thought I would stay silent. They were wrong about that too. This isn't the end of the story, but it's the moment the truth stops whispering and starts speaking out loud. The morning of the sentencing, the city seemed strangely indifferent. The sky was a pale blue, almost gentle, the kind of weather my father would have appreciated. I noticed it as I stepped out of the car and walked up the courthouse steps, realizing how surreal it was for something so final to happen on such an ordinary day. Traffic moved as usual, people stared at their phones, and a nearby coffee cart hissed with steam, as if it were just any Tuesday. Inside the courtroom, everything was completely different. I took my seat in the front row, hands folded in my lap, posture straight, breathing steady. Over the last few months, I had learned how to sit like this. Silent, present, unyielding. It was a stillness people easily mistake for peace, but it was actually control. Evelyn was brought in a few minutes later. She looked older than her years, her hair dull, her face tight, as if the muscles had forgotten how to relax. The tailored elegance she used to wear like armor was gone, replaced by a gray jumpsuit that stripped away any illusion of power. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked exactly like what she was, a defendant. Gregory Vanton entered last. This time there was no reaction from the crowd, no whispers, no gasps. Everyone already knew the outcome. The man who used to command the room with a smile and a well-timed phrase walked with his shoulders slumped, his head down, and his hands cuffed behind his back. His suit hung loosely on him, still expensive but entirely meaningless now. The room rose as Judge Whitmore entered. The air felt thick, heavy with the kind of silence that only comes at the end of a long, painful journey. I felt my heart beating in my throat, but I didn't look away. This moment belonged to the truth. Judge Whitmore didn't speak immediately. He reviewed the files, adjusted his glasses, and let the weight of the room settle completely before he began. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, precise, and uncompromising. "In the matter of the state versus Evelyn Hale and Gregory Vanton," he said, "this court finds both defendants guilty on all counts." The words didn't fall dramatically. Conspiracy, financial fraud, obstruction of justice, first-degree murder. Evelyn's shoulders sagged, as if something inside her had finally collapsed. She didn't cry and she didn't look back. She just stared straight ahead, her eyes blank, as if she were already somewhere else. Gregory closed his eyes. I didn't feel a surge of victory or a winner's high, just a deep, quiet sense of finality. Judge Whitmore continued with the sentencing, his voice steady. For the deliberate orchestration of medical intervention, falsification of records, and the intentional acceleration of death for financial gain, this court sentences Gregory Vanton to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A murmur ran through the gallery, but it was quickly silenced by the gavel. As for Evelyn Hale, the judge continued, the court notes her direct involvement and subsequent cooperation. Therefore, she is sentenced to 40 years to life. Evelyn finally let out a sharp gasp, a sound caught between relief and terror. Whatever deal she had made with herself in the dark was now sealed in concrete. The gavel struck one last time. It was over. Outside, the cameras were waiting like vultures. Reporters shouted questions, microphones were pushed forward, and voices overlapped in a chaotic chorus. Bernard stepped slightly ahead of me, guiding me down the courthouse steps, blocking the heaviest part of the crowd. I could hear my name in the wind, followed by words like justice, empire, heiress, and betrayal. I didn't stop. I didn't owe them anything. As the car door closed, cutting off the noise, Bernard looked at me carefully. "Do you want to say something? Release a statement?" I watched the city flash past the window, the buildings rising and falling like memories. "Not today," I said. "Today belongs to him." 2 weeks later, I stood in a room my father would have absolutely recognized. The boardroom of Hale Dominion no longer felt like a battlefield. The long table wasn't lined with polished executives guarding their territory, but with the people who had quietly built this company over decades. The head of logistics, the accountants, the engineers, the drivers, the people who carried the weight with their hands while others took the credit. The atmosphere was cautious but hopeful. I stood at the head of the table. In front of me was a stack of documents, held down by my father's old fountain pen. I had brought it on purpose. Some things deserved continuity. My father once believed this company could be better than the world around it, I began. He believed that success didn't have to be built on fear, and that power didn't have to mean silencing others. I paused, letting my eyes meet theirs. Some were nervous, some were skeptical, and some looked like they were holding their breath. He was wrong about some people, I continued, but he wasn't wrong about you. I pushed the documents forward. Effective today, I said, Hale Dominion will become an employee-owned company. Shares will be distributed based on tenure and contribution. Profit sharing will be instituted, pensions will be restored, and transparency will be enforced at every single level. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, someone started clapping. Then another. Soon, the sound filled the room. It was raw, imperfect, and real. It wasn't the polite applause of shareholders. It was the sound of relief, of dignity being returned. Later that afternoon, I went to a quiet place. The land, the acreage my father had refused to sell, the place that had become the silent core of everything they tried to take. The grass was high, the air was crisp, and the water reflected the sky like a kept promise. I walked slowly, feeling the earth beneath my shoes, stopping at the water's edge where he used to stand with me. They didn't take it, I whispered to the empty air. I held on to it. The wind blew through the grass, gentle and steady. Months have passed now. The headlines have faded, replaced by new scandals. Evelyn is aging behind bars, her name slowly losing its power. Gregory has disappeared into the very system he once manipulated so easily. Serafina testified, cooperated fully, and then vanished from my life, choosing a future far away from the wreckage she helped create. I haven't looked for her. Some chapters don't need to be revisited. One evening, alone in the office, I found my father's notebook again, the one he left before everything fell apart. The first page was still blank. I took the pen and wrote a single line. Notice the details, they save lives. I closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. They laughed at me in that courtroom. They called me weak, emotional, and delusional. They believed that money, lawyers, and leverage made them untouchable. But they forgot one simple thing. The truth doesn't need anyone's permission. It just takes one person willing to stand up when everyone else expects them to sit down. If this story stayed with you, if it resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. Do you think justice being served is enough? Or do some betrayals leave scars that never truly heal? If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of resilience, karma, and quiet strength, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these voices alive. Wherever you are listening, remember this. Even when they tell you that you have no leverage, your voice can still change everything.